There was once someone who did such amazing things and said such wonderful things that people had to ask who he really was. One time when they asked, he said, "I am the light." I see the love of God in you, the light of Christ comes shining through, and I am blessed to be with you, oh holy child of God. The one that said, "I am the light," changed to be in all places at all times. See this light? How it's just in one spot? Let's change the light. The light's changed. It's growing. It's becoming invisible. It's filling the room with the light of Christ. As you go about this room, know that the light is there. And when you leave this room, know that you take the light of Christ with you wherever you go. Now watch carefully, so you always know what today's lesson looks like. When Jesus went to Jerusalem for the last time, he went with the 12. They were his closest followers. They were called the disciples. On Thursday of the last week, they met in an upstairs room for the last meal together. It was when Jesus told them that he would always be with them and us when we share the holy bread and wine. But something happened just before he shared the holy bread and wine. Jesus said, "Someone who is sitting here at this table will betray me." All the disciples were shocked and sorry and angry. They cried out, "Is it I? Who is it?" That is what you see happening in this picture. Later, Judas did betray Jesus. He showed the high priest's soldiers who Jesus was later that night. There are symbols that the church gives the disciples after they begin to tell the story and become apostles. Each one has a special sign to help us to remember them and their stories. Jesus is in the middle. The disciples are in the groups of 3 on either side. Let's see who's there. This is John. He is probably the one called the beloved disciple. John first learned about Jesus when he was with John the Baptist. Right away, he told his brother James, and they both began to follow Jesus. Both brothers were fishermen. Their father's name was Zebedee. John is probably the one who wrote down the story of Jesus we call the Gospel of John. Here's the symbol for John. On his shield is a cup and the snake. They help us to remember how one time some people tried to put poison into his cup, but the snake came and drank it. The snake died to save John's life. Stories say that John was the only apostle who was not killed. He died on an island when he was an old man, full of years. Now this is Peter. He is leaning in towards Jesus behind Judas. Peter often got angry. He kind of looks angry right now, but he became more peaceful as the years went by. Peter heard about Jesus from his brother, Andrew, who was with John the Baptist. He is sitting right next to his brother, but it's hard to tell by the way he is leaning in towards John. The two brothers look a lot alike. Peter's sign is the crossed keys and an upside down cross. One time, Jesus said to Peter that he was the rock on which he would build the church. He then said that he gave Peter the keys to the kingdom. When Peter was old, he went to be with Christian people in Rome. It was against the law to be a Christian person in that days, and the soldiers caught him. They were going to nail him to a cross just like Jesus, but Peter asked them to turn him upside down. He did not deserve to die like his Lord, he said. The soldiers did as he asked, and old Peter died on the cross, too, but upside down. Judas is the one who turned against Jesus. See, he's holding a bag with 30 pieces of silver in the painting. That is what he was paid to show the soldiers who Jesus was when they went to arrest him. I wonder, what symbol should we use for Judas? Sometimes the sign for Judas is a shield that is all black. But I wonder if there really was no light in his life at all. Sometimes the sign for Judas is also 30 pieces of silver. Perhaps it's best to just leave this shield blank. This is the sign for Matthias. He is the one that replaced Judas as one of the 12 and was killed for telling the story. So his symbol is kind of a sword and a book. On the other side of Jesus are Thomas, James, and Philip. This is Thomas. He is leaning in behind James, so we see his face next to Jesus, even though James is really sitting beside Jesus. Thomas was the one who always asked the hard questions. He is sometimes called the Doubting Thomas. His sign is a spear and a builder's square. This is what a builder uses to make square corners on buildings. Thomas went to India to tell people the story of Jesus, so he began to build the church in that part of the world. He was killed in India for telling the story. This is James. He is really sitting next to Jesus. His brother John is on the one side and he is on the other. He and his brother were fishermen like Peter and Andrew. They worked for their father, Zebedee. James learned about Jesus from his brother John, who learned about him from when he was a apostle for John the Baptist. The two brothers, John and James, together with Peter, made up the inner circle of the three very close friends of Jesus' inside group of the 12. The three were there when Jesus was praying on the mountain and when he was praying in the garden. But I'm afraid they actually went to sleep 3 times. The sign for James is 3 shells. He was the first apostle to be killed. King Herod I had him executed. This is why a sword is also sometimes used as a symbol. Philip is next. He was there when Jesus fed the 5,000 people. They were hungry for the truth about life. The truth is that people need each other and need to love each other. To show this, Jesus shared a little bread and fish with them, and there was enough for all. It was kind of like a parable. His sign is has 2 loaves of bread on it to remember to this day when so many were fed so well. Now we go all the way back to the other side, clear to the other end of the table. Here is the other group of 3 people. There's Andrew, James the Less, and Bartholomew. Here's Andrew. We already know he's Peter's brother. So how is he sitting near Peter? Andrew was one of John the Baptist's disciples, but when John the Baptist showed Jesus to him, he went to get his brother Peter, and they both followed Jesus. Both Andrew and Peter were fishermen. Many centuries ago, the people of Scotland loved Andrew so much that they made him the patron saint of Scotland. If you should ever go there, you will see his sign. The cross that looks like an X. He died on a cross that was in this shape. James the Less is next. People call him the Less because he was younger or shorter than John's brother James. James the Less's sign is a saw. He was killed by a saw for telling people the story of Jesus. Kings did not like to hear about people following a king called Jesus, even though Jesus was a different kind of king. Finally, at this end of the table, we come to Bartholomew. He was told about Jesus by Philip, after Jesus told Philip to follow him. The sign for Bartholomew is knives, because he was killed by knives for telling the story of Jesus by people who did not understand. At this end of the table is the last group of 3. They are Matthew, Jude, and Simon. Here's Matthew. He was a tax collector until Jesus called him. Matthew followed Jesus and later wrote down the story of Jesus called the Gospel of Matthew. It is the first book of the New Testament. Here is Matthew's symbol. It has 3 money bags on it to help us remember that he was a hated tax collector before Jesus called him and Matthew found peace. This is Jude. His name almost sounds like Judas. He may have written the next to last book in the New Testament, which is a letter by Jude. His symbol is a ship sailing because he went across the sea to tell the story of Jesus. And here's Simon. He was a fighter for his people and for God's law, so he was called the Zealot. He was also a fisherman. The symbol for Simon is a fish and a book. The fish helps us to remember that he was a fisherman who became someone who fished for people to show them the truth about life. The book stands for the Bible. These are the 12, the apostles, and these are their symbols. Now I wonder, which symbol you like best? wonder which symbol is most important. I wonder what your symbol would look like. I wonder if your symbol would look like any of these. And I wonder, will you think of this story today? Will you see any symbols? Maybe you won't think about this story at all. But whatever you do today, know that you take the light of Christ with you wherever you go.